Hello everyone, so we're going to be going through some sending of files and JavaFX revision in this tutorial. So it is a video recording tutorial and hopefully it'll aid you sufficiently in terms of code required for custom protocols where you need to effectively create a client, create a server, and have files be exchanged between these two entities using a custom protocol that is prescribed in the practical. So this is a very useful video. Hopefully it'll give you some guidance that you can work on during the recess for your practical 4, and hopefully it'll aid you going forward. So I'm going to first speak a bit about exactly what is required in Practical 4, and then we'll move into some JavaFX revision, and then we'll speak about a demo and do a bit of a live demo and get up to scratch with the code. So if you've felt a bit lost with regard to a server, a multi-threaded server, getting that set up, I'll explain through that again. If you've had troubles understanding the concepts of sending files, binary files back and forth, that'll also be revised. So let's get into it. For Practical 4, you'll have your server. So let's start on the server side. It'll run on port 46829, and it has a text file that stores the list of the images in the format of the ID followed by the file name. And here's the order of events. Firstly, your server will accept a client connection. Then secondly, it'll handle commands. That's the main two things that it's going to be doing. So handling commands for a specific client. Now, you may assume they always take place in this particular order. First, you're going to retrieve an image list, so imglst, that is the command, the custom command according to this protocol, where we're going to be sending the image list from the text file all the way through over the network to our client. So we know that this will be text input output. Then the second command is getImg, which is to get the image, followed by an ID number. And this ID number you will then use to identify which image to send across back to the client that they've requested. So what is really important with sending binary files is that the sender should always first send the file size in bytes before we send the actual file, so that you warn the receiving side how many bytes they can expect to receive on the other end. So that's very important to be aware of, and we'll be implementing that in the demo later on. Then your server is supposed to be doing the post img command. So this is to actually have a image being posted to it. So an image is uploaded to the server. So here you can see there's a number of parameters that is sent to the server when this command is received. So it's the ID, the name, the size, and then the actual image. So what you're going to do is you're going to first store the image and add it to the text file, because you know there's a new file that's now being uploaded to your server. So you need to keep a record of that, and so you need to make sure you add it to the text file as well. And then, as we know, when we're receiving a binary file, we need to be provided with a text parameter which indicates the file size in bytes of the file that's to be received. Alright, and so then on the client side, it's just the flip. You will connect to the server, and then we'll get the image list from our server, and we'll store it in memory. This is just a good tip. Store this image list in memory like you can use a string array or an array list to store the images in memory, so that you can match the user entered IDs with the file names. So once you've retrieved the image list, you can keep it in memory and then know, alright, what is the actual image that's been requested. So then you've got the getImg and then ID command. Once again, we're going to be downloading the image. So we'll first get back from the server the file size in bytes, and that'll then be followed by the binary file. The reverse of that then is posting the image. If we send the post image command is where we want to upload to the server, and so we'll send it the image post image command followed by the ID, the name of this file, the size of this file, and then the actual file. So be aware of it. So as you can see, they're quite the opposite, but they're both going to do the same thing, just in depending on the command that is sent to the client and the server. Both will be receiving and sending. So that is Practical 4. And as you'll remember, I've given this code out before. How do we send binary data? Very important for us to be aware of how we go ahead and do it. We check first if the file that we want to send, if it does exist. Now, we always return the file size before we send it. So what do? You're going to use your text stream to send that file's size. So you can use that file to return .length, the .length method there. And then sending the actual binary file, this is where we set up our file input stream, where we're ready to read it into memory. You create your byte array, and you have your integer n that is set up. Then you have your while loop over here. So while there is still stuff to read, read it from our file input stream, read it into the buffer, and while that amount of bytes is still greater than 0, continue then to write it out, whatever is in the buffer from byte 0 to byte n, write it onto my data output stream and flash my data output stream. And this will happen continuously while there is still bytes to be read from our file input stream. And then after that, you obviously close your file input stream, and there we go. We've got our file and file size and files sent to the client. On the opposite end of this is also a core code for you to be aware of. You can receive the file size first. So that's what we're expecting to receive. And remember to use the integer.parseInt because it's coming in as a string. So we want to convert it to a valid data type for us, right? Now here's just a little hint. For Prac4, you will need to get the file name that matches the requested ID. So we need to make sure, okay, this was just from a previous year, but basically you can use your command to get the basic list back to view this in memory. So as you can see here, you've got your file to download that you once again create, and you're preparing to receive it. And then you've got your file output stream, you've got your byte array that's set up, you've got your integer n, and you've got your total bytes. Now when receiving, we need to keep checking when have we actually received all of the bytes, and when have we not yet. So what we're saying is, while our total bytes is not equal to the file size, we're going to continuously keep on receiving, basically. So you're going to read what's going to come in over the data input stream. You're going to read it read it into the buffer from byte 0 up until the length of the buffer, and then you're going to write out, you're going to use your file output stream to write whatever is in the buffer from byte 0 to n. You're going to write it into your file that you've created, and you're going to flash it and increment your total bytes by n. Make sure this code makes sense to you as well as the previous slide, and we'll see it in the demo later on. Alright, now speaking a bit more about JavaFX, just some GUI basics. Now, I'm sure you've done quite a bit of JavaFX in your previous semester. You used it maybe slightly differently, but here is just a guideline and a approach that you can make use of. Firstly, you have to make sure that your class extends application for it to make use of JavaFX. You need to implement the start method that is required, and you need to launch your JavaFX application in your main method, which is the only code that's needed for your main. Then you need to instantiate a pane. You need to add this pane to a scene, and you need to set the scene for the stage that's provided by your application, and then you need to show the stage. So as you can see here, that's exactly what's being done in this code, where you've got your launch in your main method, and then we create your client pane, you create a scene, You set your title, you can set the scene to that particular scene in which you can set the sizes and which pane is to be in there, and then you show it. Now, often I make use of a grid pane layout. It's an easy, straightforward layout. You may use stack pane, whichever pane you're comfortable with, as long as your GUI is neat and tidy and you're coding it yourself. So you've got your grid pane as a new grid pane. We can set the alignment. So this means I'm centering my elements that's being put on this grid pane. You set the horizontal gap and the vertical gap between your elements. So you can go ahead and do that. That's just an approach to make it all neat. And here's an example where I've actually just used a few different elements. So I've got a scene title that's of type text, and it's called welcome, and then you can set different fonts for that text, and we can then add that to our grid pane at a specific row. It starts at columns actually. It starts at the column, then it goes to the row, and then you've got your col span and your row span. So across how many columns should this span and how many rows should this span. So that's quite important. Then you've got the username label being set up here, and it's being added to column 0, row 1. Got your text field added, it's column 1, row 1, and another label for the password, and a password field as well, and it's being added to our grid pane. So as you can see here, here is an example of how these elements would be placed. That was the code for it, and here you can see just how it all comes together in the JavaFX layout. So yeah, we've got our, as you can see, we've got 2 columns, and this welcome spans 2 columns, column 0 and column 1, row 0, 1, 2. So it starts at index 0. Okay, and then adding a button. As you can see, you've got your button that you can create. You can create an H box, horizontal box layout pane with a spacing of 10 pixels. You can set its alignment. You can add that particular button to that layout pane and add it then. To handle an event, remember, you can use lambda expression. Just remember the bracket there, and just print out a message once that button's clicked, for instance, just to test it out. So here's just some basics for JavaFX that you can make use of and play around with. Okay, then you'll see it's been shown in the demo for your Practical X as well. But if you have an image that you want to display, you may want to make use of image view and relative paths. So if you have a project where you've got the structure where you've got your main.java under the source, and then you've got a data folder where you've got your JPEG image, you will have to make sure that JavaFX knows how to render this particular image on the screen. So how do we go ahead and do that? So here's an example. I just created a stack pane. The important part here is your image that you create. I create a new image and I use this relative path. So this is the structure that you need to let it know. You use a file, colon, and then you say data / where that JPEG may be. Then you create an image view, and then you set the image of that image view to the particular image for which you've specified a path. And once you've done that, then you can add your image view to your root node. So as you can see, I've added the image view, so it's now on my my nodes, it's on my pane, and so whenever I make this stage visible, my image will show because I've used the image view. So that's just something useful for you to be aware of on how to display an image and how to go ahead and get that working for your Practical 4, because as one of the commands, you may want to display the image once it's been sent across. So that is in a nutshell the slides that we wanted to cover for this tutorial. So let us move into a practical example with coding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my Eclipse. I've got a base project set up, but not all the code has been added to it. So what I'm going to start with is the server side of things, and I'm going to make sure we cover the necessary things for multi-threading at first, then move over to the client side, and then I'll discuss just a bit more admin points for your practical. Now, before we get to the multi-threading, I'm just going to speak about the structure of your project. Now, you've been provided with a docs folder which contains the different bat files. Now, for these bat files to work, your project has to be structured as follows. In your source folder, you need to have created two different packages. A package that's under CEC2B, and then one for client and one for server. So as you can see, this is the way it is structured. And then inside of my client, the main class for my client has to be called client.java, and the main class for my server inside my server package has to be called server.java. That is really, really important for these bat files to run. Now remember, the first bat file is there for you to actually see, just clean your bin files. It cleans out all the bin files. Then this one builds your server, the other one builds your client. If you do struggle with it, a setup document has been provided under additional files as well, a PDF where you can see how to get things properly set up. Alright, so speaking about a server, when we want to get a server set up, I'm going to do a basic file sending thing where we've got data on our server side. I've got a nice song, that beautiful song.mp3, that's on my server side, and we want the server to be able to send this file to my client. So when I hit refresh after I've done everything, I want to see it in my client folder, this song having been transferred there. So it's essentially a download from the server that the client is doing, a download operation from client to server. So how do we get to doing all of that? We firstly need to have our server socket set up, and then we've got our Boolean to indicate whether my server is ready to be running. So firstly, I need to set up my server, and how I'm going to go ahead and do it, I've got my SS is a new server socket, and we need to bind it to a port. I'm for now just going to bind it to the port that's being passed as a parameter to this constructor. So this is what you'll want to have in your server always. You want to definitely have that constructor so that you can then call this constructor in your main method. So let's surround this with a try catch so that we handle our exceptions. And now I can also just output a nice message saying that server created on port that particular port, and then we know that okay, my server is ready, so that then becomes true. My Boolean flag becomes true. Now sometimes I just have a method here that I do to say okay, start the server. Now you can extract this as a separate method, or you can just code it here. So if we're going to code it here, we're going to have our while forever loop. So while the server is ready, while it is ready, we're going to accept client connections, right? So that's how it works. Accept client connection. So at the moment I'm on my server side, it's the main class of underneath this package over here. So I'm going to accept client connections. So remember, for a server we've got that server.accept method. So I'll have to create a new socket. So socket, let's call it incoming connection is ss.accept. And now I have to go ahead and create a new thread. Thread T is a new thread. okay? Because remember, we want to accept this connection and pass it on to a thread so that that thread can then handle it independently, and my server can carry on waiting for new incoming connections from clients. Alright, so how do I do this? In the thread, I would have to pass it a class that implements the runnable method, or that is a multi-threaded class. Now, our handler class is going to be such a class. So for now, I'm going to call the constructor of my file handler, even though it may not have been officially coded yet. So, and I'm going to pass the incoming connection to that over there. Alright, and then always you want to have your thread to be started. Because now we know, okay, there's a new thread created and we're dealing with this file handler class, and everything's going to be moving on to there. So as you can see, I'll speak about this more, this constructor in our file handler class. As you can see here, I've got that, but it's empty. It's not doing anything just yet, but it's just the framework that's been set up there. So important, you need this class to implement the runnable interface, and therefore it has to implement the run method or override the run method. So just to go back to our server, let us complete this so that the server can actually get running. So how do we do this? We'll call our constructor here. So I'm going to say server myserv is a new server, and I need the server to run. Let's try use port 2022 and see if that'll work for us. Now remember, I can't actually successfully necessarily accept client connections just yet, but this should create a basic server for us. So if I hit run here on this this side, oh, it says I have errors. Alright, I'll have errors on this side probably because I've removed some things. I'm gonna just remove this for now. Should be okay. Perhaps not. Alright, I mean, I'll fix this up just now. Don't stress about that. I just want to do a test run. Ignore this at the moment. Just wanted to do a test run on it all. Oh, I see what happened here. It just needs a ending off of things. Alright, so essentially once we've got that sorted, I'll just work a bit on this client pane in the meantime, but I'm going to first just explain this part. So carrying on to our file handler. We've got a socket incoming connection, and let us code this part and then we'll see if we can get our project just to work once I can see what the error is over there. So firstly, you've got your incoming connection here, and we want to make sure that we are able to then set up all our streams in this constructor, and that we've got our connection properly linked with this incoming connection, basically, so that this member variable that we know, okay, whatever connection came in from the server is now linked to this member variable in this particular class. So we're going to say this dot incoming connection is equal to incoming connection. Then we need to set up our streams. This should go fairly quickly. This is usually inside of your constructor. So if we set up these streams, we're going to have our output stream is this is going to be our incoming connection dot get output stream. Input stream is incoming connection dot get input stream. Okay, very important. We need to surround this with a try catch. So let's do that. data output stream is a new data output stream. And remember, you bind it around your byte streams. So there's our binary stream setup, and then we want to set up our text streams. And our buffered reader, txtn, is a new buffered reader. And remember, you need a new input stream reader over there. Alright, that looks good. So that is all set up in that constructor over there. And now we know that, alright, the run method will be called whenever this this thread is then created, right? So there will be a element of the server being ready to process commands. So let's just print out to our client, okay, server ready to process commands. And here I have a boolean, which is a flag for processing. So I'm going to say, okay, processing becomes true. We're actually ready to process client commands. And I'm going to put all of this in a try catch. And it'll be, yeah, IO exception will become useful later on. But here you'll see, okay, we want to create a while loop, basically. While we're processing the client's commands, we can handle all kinds of commands. So let's say the first command that we receive is going to be string. Let's call it string. Command line is txtn dot read line over there. And there we can see our IO exception will definitely be caught there. So let's say e dot print stack trace or print message, just handling that exception over there. And we can also just print that out to our user, whichever command we've received. Command line over there plus command line. All right. Command. Sorry, that was a little messy. Let's just say command. Here we go. All right. Then our file client pane. Let me quickly see what's going on here. Got all of that. That's fine. Let me remove this for now. Let's save it. See where's the other error coming from now. Alright, there's an issue with these guys. Okay, I see. It's just a matter of adding one of these. That was the error. Alright, there we go. Be very careful when you just delete brackets, can give you some issues. Alright, but now we're in a working position. So let us run this and save everything. And you'll see, okay, the server has been created on this particular port 2022. Now I've not properly coded the client yet at all, but there is a starting point for us, and we know that it will read a command that's coming in from a client. So let's see, maybe we can test that with a client. If I try use putty, see if that'll work. Now, might not be perfect, but let us see. If I go ahead and set it all up and see if I try to get a client to connect to the server that I've constructed. Right, so then I'm gonna give it a command and just say hello. Or maybe let's say return, because that's the command I'm gonna use in this case. So as you can see, it got the command return from the client. So we're happy with that. Let's end the session for now and let's just stop it. All right, so carrying on, we're actually gonna see how we can get a, let's see, we can complete our server and then we will carry on to the client side and get all of that done. So we're processing commands from a client. Now, firstly, if the command that is being sent is the return command, we're going to handle it, right? And we're going to send back that particular file that is in my data folder that I want to send back. So I'm going to say, okay, if command line, remember, dot equals, that's what you use with strings, dot equals, return. Then please carry on to do the following. Now remember, in your practical 4, you'll be getting an ID followed by this. In this example, there is no ID, but just be aware of that in PO4 you will get the file ID as the next token, and then you'll use that to retrieve the file name, essentially. The file name from the text file, because you'll then be able to know, oh, they're requesting image number 1 and so forth. But this is just a hint. For now, we're going to do it in a very simple manner. I'm going to say file to return, and the one that I want to return is this one, beautifulsong.mp3. So it's a new file. Let's give it the path to that. So it's data/server/ beautiful /beautiful capital song.mp3. Now we need to check if this file that we want to send across actually does exist. So if file to return .exists, only then can we go ahead and actually send it. You could go just print out, put some debug statements for yourself. The file to send exists. Alright, and remember, you can write a separate message helper method for sending messages. But I'm going to just do it the plain way. I'm going to say txt_out.println. What do we want to send it? Remember, firstly, you need to send the file size. So I'm going to say .length. So file to return its size. And for good measure, just flash my stream. Okay, so once I've done this, then I'm going to send the actual binary file to my client. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to read this file into memory. So I'm going to use a file input stream, new file input stream, and this is for the file that I want to return. Now I create my byte array. Let's make it 2048 bytes. over there, int n is 0. Now what are we going to do? We're going to keep on reading and writing out onto the stream while a certain condition is true. So the file input stream.read method returns will return a number for you. So n, remember, n is going to be the file input stream.read method's output. So it gives you back how many bytes have been read from the disk into memory. So read whatever is on disk, read it into this buffer. Alright, and while that is actually greater than 0, keep on reading. Keep on reading, but then while you're reading, please write it out. Write whatever is in the buffer. Write it from byte 0 to byte n. Write it onto my data output stream. And I'm going to say data output stream dot flush. After that's done, I can successfully close my file input stream. And then just for a good measure, this is out file size and file sent to the client. Alright, so that's as simple as that, to send a basic binary file to my client. But now I need to get my client ready to receive or first send the command and then receive a response back. So how are we going to go do that? Now I've set up my client already just so that we can save a bit of time, and the basics of JavaFX have just been discussed. So what do I have here in my client main? I've got the launch method and I've got my start method. Now, very important, only the client needs a front-end interface. For my server, I do not need a JavaFX or a GUI. If you go ahead and do a GUI, well done, you can do that, but it's not necessary for the purpose of the practical at all. However, the client does need a GUI. So here you can see I've just set it up so that I've got my client pane and I make it visible to my user. And I've actually set it up. So if I run this client now, you'll see what it actually looks like. It comes out as a simple GUI over here. Just has a connect button, it's a file client, and then I want a file, namely this song, to be returned to me so that I can see it in my folder on the other side, that my program has successfully sent it through to the client side. So yeah, the framework is here for us. These buttons just don't do anything properly just yet. That connect button failed because there was no server running. Alright, so let's go ahead and fix all of that. So what you'll always have in your client pane, you'll extend stack pane or grid pane or whichever pane you're comfortable with working with. It'll have a member variable for the socket that is trying to connect to the server. And then I have all of my streams set up here. And then the different GUI elements, you'll have them as member variables as well. I've created a helper method. Most of the code happens in this constructor, right? Because this is where my button clicks are handled and so forth. So I just created a nice little helper method that'll help me set up my GUI. And I'm sure you all can derive the logic from here based off of the slides that I've given you with the column number, row number, call span. Feel free to pause here if you want to just have an in-depth look at how the GUI was set up. So what did I do in my connect? I have a button that connects to the local host. It'll create a client socket or it uses this member variable to create a new socket that connects to our local host on port 2022. And then you've got your streams set up and you've got everything done there, and I can append to my list area saying, okay, just giving me a status as to where we're at, that our socket has successfully connected to the server. So basically we've already got our server and our client that can interact with each other. So I can firstly go and run my server over here, and then if I go to my client and I run my client, here it pops up, and if I click connect, it'll say, oh, you connected to the port 22 on your server. If I click return, nothing will happen just yet, but we know what we want to have happen. So just quick, let's go and get that done with a button click inside of this constructor. So I have my btn ret, so I'm going to say btn ret dot set on action. Alright, so I'm going to say event, use lambda expression to code this event because it's nice and clean. Alright, so let's go ahead. Now, firstly, I'm going to receive I'm going to send out. I'm going to say txt out dot print line, and I'm going to say return. I'm going to say txt out dot flush. Okay, so now we know that the server will now come back with the file size plus the file. Alrighty, so let's quickly code this, and then we'll be done in a little bit, and then you'll be able to test it and go ahead and try this out by yourself. So let's quickly do this. I'm going to first have my file output stream that's set up, FOS, and let's assign it the value of null first. And then I want to try catch block again because we know we might have various kinds of IO exceptions that might be thrown. So I'm going to say IO exception. Alright, and you might want to finally block as well, where we check all kinds of things. We'll get to that in a little bit. Finally. Alright, so what we're going to try is first to read what comes back to us. So I'm going to say string response is txtn dot read line, and then I'm going to say list area dot append text, and this will be the file size that comes back to us first. So we've got the file size plus, let's just print that out. Okay, now remember, for prac4 you'll need to get the file name that matches the requested ID, so you may need to make use of that previous list command that you got back from the server to derive what that file name then is over there. Alright, so I'm going to get the file that I want to download. So I'm going to say file to download. I'm going to say it's a new file. Alright, now to derive the name you might need to use the list command from the server. But I already know what the file name is, so it's data, and I'm going to save it to my client folder once I received it, and I'm going to also call it beautiful song.mp3. So there's some logic that needs to be added for file name from server to be added for practical 4. Alright, now once again, here's just the opposite. I'm preparing to receive a file. So I'm going to say it's a new file output stream because I'm going to write to a file that I'm preparing to download to. So I'm going to say byte array once again have a buffer, and it's a new byte array, and we can make it an arbitrary size as well. Let's just use 2048. You've got your int n is equal to 0, and you'll have your int total bytes, which is first starting at 0. So once again, we have a while loop here, but it's different when we're receiving a file from when we're sending a file. So when we're receiving a file, we're going to check while our total bytes is not equal to the file size. Alright, but now, did we actually get the file size? I don't think so. So we need to go ahead and find the file size. Remember, it was sent to me here. So I'm going to make an integer file size is equal to integer dot parse int. And yeah, we're going to pass it response. There we go. So while the total bytes is not equal to file size, we're going to say, okay, let's read what's coming in over the data input stream. Okay, and read it into the buffer from byte 0 to buffer.length. Then you're going to say, okay, file output stream dot write. Let's write it. Write to my file output stream whatever is in the buffer from byte 0 up until n, and then you're going to flush, and remember to increment your total bytes, otherwise you're going to have an issue. Then we can say, okay, it's been successfully, can display on our GUI that it's been successfully received. Append text, and let's say file downloaded to client. And there we go. And then we can have a finally block where we might want to check if our file output stream is not equal to null. We might want to close it, and also we might want to check if our socket and client socket is not equal to null. We might want to close it. So let's say if os.close, here we go, and it'll still, and I might want to go client socket dot close. Here we go. There we are. Let's see if this works successfully for us. So we've got server. Let's run the server. Oops, we've got some errors. Where are these errors? Oh, forgot a semicolon. There. Probably asked me for a try catch. Let's surround it with a try catch. There we go. Should be good now. Let's try again. Server is running on port 2022, and let's run the client. Alright, so first thing first, I'm gonna connect, successfully connected. Then let's hit return. Alright, there the file got downloaded to the client. Alright, see I have a little null pointer exception, so there's just a bit of debugging to be done there. But if I now hit on my project and I go hit refresh, you'll see my client just received that beautiful song on the other side. So it successfully done that. It's successfully received the folder or the file on the other side. So be sure to understand what's happening in this particular practical, that you have your client, you've got your server as the main parts, and then you've got in your client pane where you handle your button clicks, and you've got your file handler where you handle different commands inside of your run command or inside your run method. Alright, that's it everyone. I hope that this recording has been helpful to you all and that it aids you in further practicals that you have going forward, and especially for your practical test that's coming up end of September. I hope you all have a good rest of your weekend and week, and I'll see you again shortly.